Welcome to the latest BuffZone podcast. I'm Brian Howell. I'm pleased to be joined once again by my colleague Pat Rooney. And Pat, how you doing today?
Doing well, Brian Howell. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday to you. And we obviously are going to be talking about a lot of football, but basketball started up this week for the Buffs. So as far as practice and volleyball and soccer in full swing as well. But let's start with football. The Buffs coming off of a nice win against Wyoming. Figured out their quarterback, and Caden Salter looked pretty good, and had statistically one of the best games in CU history for a quarterback. Only the second time ever 300 passing yards, three touchdowns, and 80 rushing yards. So statistically, he was phenomenal. But now it's a bigger test coming forward this week. Number 25 BYU in town.
Yeah, exactly. And, we've kind of rehashed the game against Wyoming, quite a bit at this point. And Caden Salter really kind of grabbed that starting job for sure. I think coming out of that, that's obviously the big takeaway from the game, right? Not
Mhm.
just he started, but he kind of came in. It seems like a situation right now it seemed like Coach Deion Sanders pressed the right buttons in terms of Salter. Kind
Yeah.
of the old kick in the pants sort of move to inspire him a little bit. It certainly paid dividends against Wyoming. He looked every bit like the guy that they recruited out of Liberty. That dual threat guy can hurt you with your legs and obviously make plays with his arm. The question now and going forward is, Wyoming is one thing, right? Wyoming is probably looking like a, bottom tier Mountain West team this season. Can Caden Salter do it against the better teams in the Big 12 that are going to be more like what we saw, I think, with Georgia Tech out of the gate in the season opener? And Salter was all right in that game. Wasn't great, wasn't bad, settling in and all that. But now will come the real test, beginning with BYU. But I've written a little bit about this. The next month or so is kind of going to be the real test for this Buffalo's team, to see just kind of where they're going to fare in the Big 12 race. And can Caden Salter get it done against some of the better competition in the Big 12? I think the jury's still out on that, but we'll find out on Saturday night against BYU.
Yeah, we're definitely going to find out. And it's interesting. We're 4 games in, and I know it's been so up and down with this Buffs team. And I'm glad you mentioned this. So, Coach Prime maybe pressing the right buttons, and maybe what we saw the first 3 weeks of the season was not the true Buffs because they weren't getting what the coaches wanted out of their guys, and maybe last week was a wake up call for Caden Salter and others. I mean, Coach Prime has been quick to point out, hey, it's not just Caden. There's others that we've needed to step up. And there was several guys in that Wyoming game that, guys on defense like Martavius French or Reginald Hughes. I'm like, man, they tackled better against Wyoming than they had the previous few weeks. And I thought Carter Stoutmeyer played more sound than he had up to that point. And so maybe that was a wake up call to where he has said all along, right? That this Buffs team, this team is better than what we had last year, and I've always pushed against that. I don't see that, but maybe the wake up call has happened to where they can get closer to what he sees, to where they're going to be more competitive in the Big 12.
Yeah, and I guess, like I said, we'll kind of find out in this next month. But
Yeah,
certainly, in terms of the quarterback, the button pressing worked, right? At least in this Wyoming game. We'll see how it pans out going forward. But we have to give I have to give Deion Sanders credit for that move.
yeah,
He didn't like what he saw in the Georgia Tech game. I'm just kind of reading between the lines. Didn't like what he kind of saw out of Caden Salter behind the scenes in terms of really kind of taking hold of this offense and taking command of the offense. Clearly with some of the things he said about leadership and that sort of things behind the scene have kind of come into fruition with that game, and I think it all came together against Wyoming. And you mentioned there's other spots. I think the offensive line has come along a little bit. There's been some juggling there, and I know they ended the Wyoming game with a couple guys banged up that seem to be trending toward playing this week. Especially Jordan Seaton. They're not
yeah.
going to be able to tackle this month without him. We'll see. We'll see how the it would be unfortunate if the Houston game wound up being kind of sacrificed in order to send a message. But I don't know that that's the case just yet. I think that
Yeah.
we'll find that out with how the Buffs play on Saturday and going forward against some of this better competition.
Yeah, and I will say this: you're right, and I think that's one that we're gonna have to judge at the end of the season because I did think about that because my I believe that they never wanted to take Caden Salter out of that starting job. It was just they felt like they had to send that message, and I've thought that several times. Like, did they sacrifice the Houston game to get that message across? Well, if they wind up in a bowl game and maybe they're 6-6, 7-5, or whatever, I say that was a good thing you did that,
Sure.
and because I'm not sure they would have got to the bowl game if you do that. I mean, if they would have let things keep going the way they were probably trending toward a 3-9, 4-8 team, the way things are going, right? And so maybe sacrificing that Houston game, and you don't want to. You probably hope to win it with Ryan Staub, but maybe sacrificing that Houston game turns out to be a good thing. But again, as we said, we're going to find out, and tomorrow night's going to say a lot. I think we're going to learn a lot about this Colorado football team tomorrow night because I think Georgia Tech's probably better, but BYU is you know one of the first big tests for this Buffs team.
Yeah, I guess going back to that, Houston, that'll be the big what if, I guess, at the end of the
Yeah.
year.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't know, if you play Caden Salter throughout the Delaware game, does that happen? I got it's again, we'll never know. Maybe
Yeah.
I about it. Maybe Salter settles in. They put up a better fight in Houston. We'll never know. I guess that's something we can speculate on the way this plays out the rest of the season. But certainly a big challenge for Caden Salter and that offense this week. BYU physical up front. I guess, for you looking at this matchup, what do you feel like are the biggest keys if the Buffs want to come away with this thing on Saturday night, maybe Sunday morning by the time we get to the final? But Saturday night, what's the keys for the Buffs to walk away with a victory?
Yeah, for me, it starts with physicality, and I think I can't get the Alamo Bowl out of my mind because that was the last time they played. I mean, they played just 9 months ago, and it's very different teams. I get that. I think there's only 5 of 22 starters back for the Buffs, and two of them are offensive linemen that are backups now that may not be in the lineup on Saturday night. And so, BYU has 10 starters back from that game. So, but they're very different. Both have different quarterbacks, and BYU is missing most of its defensive line from that game last year. So it's very different. But in that bowl game, BYU pushed the Buffs around on both sides of the ball. And that was the biggest difference in that game, I thought. And so to me, the biggest key is the Buffs have got to match the physicality of BYU. They need to come out and be physical. If they're not pushing the Cougars around a little bit, then I think it's going to be a long night for the Buffs.
And that means being able to run the ball on offense. There's some
Yeah.
banged up running backs too, so we'll see how that plays out on Saturday. Who kind of gets the call out of the gate, and every game they've been using multiple guys anyway, so we'll see how that rotation kind of pans out with both Simeon Price and DeKalen Taylor both coming out of that Wyoming game a little banged up. But that for me, first I totally agree with you on the physicality. For me, for the Buffs, it has to come to fruition on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
They've struggled to, you know, consistently shut people down. They had a better, maybe overall effort against Wyoming. Still got touched for a couple big plays that you really don't want to see. Has kind of been a consistent theme in the first third of this season for that defense, giving up those big chunk yard plays. And they can't afford to do that against BYU this week because I
Yeah.
don't know that the Buffs are going to be able to outscore them. So, yes, agree with you on the physicality, but this has to be the defense's best game of the season, I feel like, for the Buffs to come away with a win.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I don't think BYU is a juggernaut offensively at this point. They got a true freshman quarterback, and they haven't really been tested a whole lot yet this season. Bear Bachmeier has played well, but he is a true freshman, and he's avoided mistakes. So that's a good thing. But LJ Martin had a really good game against the Buffs in the bowl game and is a very good running back. And so, yeah, the defense has got to step up. And I think they've got to force that freshman quarterback into some mistakes that he hasn't made yet. If they can do that, I think the Buffs can win this game.
And maybe that's a key right there that you just alluded to. This team is BYU, that is, has not been tested that much out of the gate here. They've looked good in their games, but it hasn't been great competition that they've played so far. You get them in Folsom Field, national game, under the lights, raucous crowd, see how this freshman quarterback reacts. But you got to make pressure on him. And I don't mean just the physical pressure,
Yeah.
which need as well. They need to make him uncomfortable back there. But I'm just talking about just the pressure of the game. The Buffs have to keep it close. They have to hit hard. They have to take away options from him. They just have to put a lot of pressure on his shoulders to come through in that kind of situation and let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah, make him beat you and not that run game and things like that. So, what do you think? Prediction for this game?
Yeah, I still don't, those keys aside, I don't feel like this is a good matchup for the Buffs. I don't have a lot of confidence in their defense just yet to for them to come out on the right side of what's kind of looking to be a sort of physical battle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think BYU's got more talent, more physical up front. I think the Buffs will keep it close for a while before BYU pulls away. I think it'll be something like 31-17 BYU.
All right. Yeah, I'm thinking along the same lines. I just think until I see the Buffs beat a team physically, it's hard for me to imagine them beating a team like BYU. And I think I can't pick the Buffs in this one because of that. And like you said, with their defense, there's not been enough out of that Buffs defense for me to think, yeah, they're going to come out and have their best game on Saturday night. If they do, I think they can win the game. But I'm not going to predict it. I think BYU wins this thing 30-23. I think it'll be a good football game throughout. But I think the BYU is right now in a better spot than CU is. And I think they're further along than where CU is right now.
Yeah, and I feel like in the 2+ seasons under Deion Sanders, obviously the team is tremendously better than it used to be. But,
Yeah,
really parse it down, I don't know how many W's you can chalk up that they've had against really high-end competition.
right.
Go back to the very Deion Sanders opener at TCU, knocking off a ranked team on the road. Well, that TCU team wound up being very average. I think 5-7, if I remember correctly, off the top of my head here. Last year the Buffs got fat against the lower division in the Big 12 and struggled against some of the other front runners in the Big 12. Is this the game where that changes? Maybe,
Yeah.
but until I actually see it change, it's hard for me to back the Buffs in a matchup like this.
Yeah, that TCU game was the last ranked win, and they've had several ranked opponents since then. I think
Yeah.
it's 7 since then. They're 1-15 their last 16 games against ranked opponents, and BYU comes in number 25. So yeah, I think the Buffs can win, but I'm picking a BYU victory. But we'll see. I think switching gears before we get out of here, Pat. I think most people would have predicted a BYU victory in volleyball in Provo on
Yeah.
Thursday night, and the Buffs win in there, beat the number 14 Cougars in 4 sets.
Yeah, maybe if you're a Buffs fan, maybe it's a good omen for the rest of the weekend against ranked BYU teams. But
Yeah,
certainly a good omen for the women's volleyball team trying to make that next step this year. They also got fat against mediocre competition in the non-conference schedule. Did well, looked good doing it, and that 9-0 start. But they had a real reality check last week, getting swept by Colorado State in a home-and-home series. But what a bounce back this week to go on the road. For the volleyball team, it was 10 consecutive losses since their last win against I'm sorry, 0 for 10 in the last 2 seasons against ranked teams, and 1-14 overall since their last win against a ranked team almost 3 years ago.
yeah,
So huge win. They have another big battle on Saturday afternoon ahead of the BYU football game. Actually, Saturday afternoon. If for some reason you're bored with college football, the volleyball will be on ESPN Plus against Utah, which is ranked number 23. But even if you lose that, you feel good about getting this win on the road before you come back home. But obviously, the opportunity to get a road sweep against ranked teams is a big one for a volleyball team that's trying to make the next step and show that they belong in the race in the Big 12.
yeah. And soccer, how are they doing at this point?
Yeah, real quick. Last night, Thursday night, picked up their first Big 12 win, 1-0-1 now in the Big 12. Hope Leba is having a season for the ages, folks. So tune in. She's got a chance to make a run at Nikki Marshall's program record of 17 goals in the season. Hope Leba's at 12 now. She's among 3. I'm sorry, it's more than 3, but she's among a big group tied for 3rd all time in season goals. She's already climbing the ladder in career goals. So she's having a really special season. Became the first player to have 2 hat tricks in the same season.
Yeah.
Nikki Marsh did it a couple times in a couple different seasons, but never twice in the same season. And, to do it in a non-conference play is one thing. To do it against any Big 12 team is quite another. So she's having a really good season, but the whole team's playing pretty well. And they cap a homestand against Houston on Sunday afternoon at Prentup. Another very winnable game, and one I feel like Colorado has to get in the win column if they want to kind of continue. Because then it's road heavy. They've opened with 3 Big 12 home games. It's going to be road heavy the rest of the way for soccer. So you really kind of feel like you have to pick up this win against Houston
Yeah.
on Sunday to kind of stay in the race in the big picture.
Yeah. And then obviously, as we mentioned, basketball started up this week. Men started practice on Wednesday, the women on Thursday. So we'll talk more about that as they get closer to their seasons. But yeah, this is starting that transition time where there's a lot going on. And like October, November are kind of the busiest months, Pat, for us because there's the overlap of the fall sports and the winter sports.
Yeah, and a couple times the last few years, maybe one of the sports would falter and maybe they'd fall off our radar a little bit toward the end of the season. But
Yeah.
Volleyball keeps this up, and soccer should be in the mix. They're gunning for a third straight NCAA tournament time. Be busy for us, but it should be a fun time for Buffs fans.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, we'll see you on Saturday night, late Saturday night at Folsom
It's
Field.
maybe into Sunday morning. So I will see you there, Brian Howell. And as always, folks, thanks for listening.